Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at a media theorist named Neil Postman, who wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Whereas Marshall McLuhan probably wouldn't have considered himself as much of a critical theorist. I'm not sure if Neil Postman would have considered himself as a Marxist, but definitely was not a conservative. I am going to start this video out by saying that this is probably the video that I'm the most nervous about recording, and for this reason. Amusing Ourselves to Death is such a fantastic, just an absolutely amazing book. It's beautifully written. It's just insight after insight after insight that you can read it and be reflecting on what you've seen on TV and be like, oh my God, I never really thought about it that way. It's just incredible. And as a result of which, I want to both convey his insights, at least several of them from the book, and I want to do it well, but I also want to convey to you just how fantastic it is and how well worth your reading it is. Okay, so that kind of fanboy thing out of the way, let's go back to Marshall McLuhan for just a moment to contextualize Neil Postman. So McLuhan says the medium is the message. In other words, we concluded by saying each medium produces a new type of human being. So he's focused on the medium directly creating the human being. Neil Postman is interested in the fact that the medium influences the way people communicate with each other. He says forms of public discourse, so public discourse just means the way we communicate in a public way, regulate the content that can come from that form, which sounds super dry, and I just told you the book is amazing. Trust me, the book is amazing. He says the form regulates the content that you get from the medium creates the culture, and the culture orients our thoughts and sensibilities. So basically from the form, from the medium, we get a specific type of content. That specific type of content influences the culture we live in, and that creates the people that we are. McLuhan was more of a direct line from medium to people, and Postman doesn't think that's wrong. In fact, he at the beginning of his book talks about the fact that Marshall McLuhan isn't talked about enough. But he says there's also this indirect route between the medium of communication and its effect on people. McLuhan wasn't interested in the content. Postman says, well, actually, there's something there as well. So he begins actually in the book, or one of the first things he talks about is the idea that he talks about how, this is his example of how the medium influences the content that is possible. He talks about smoke signals, and he says, you can communicate with somebody through smoke signals, but you can't communicate everything you want. Smoke is not a complex enough thing to be able to communicate philosophical ideas. You are communicating, basically very simple messages. That's not to say that it isn't an innovation, and it's not to say that those people then were simple. It's to say that that form of communication, just that specific form, limits what is possible to be communicated through that form. And that's basically the point. And then he's going to go on to say, okay, so it encourages, you can say some things through it, but you don't say other things through that form. He says the same is true for television. He says that form, TV, has a particular type of content, and that content is visual. And this is crucial for him. Obviously, people say things, but it is way more interesting when you can think about this. You do watch movies where it's just one person. Think about how boring this is right now, right? This is just some guy standing in front of a whiteboard. There's nothing happening. It's not entertaining. This is not visually engaging, which is why most of the content that you see visually, even if it's a lecture, has got some more high-tech thing going on. Sorry, I don't have that. He says this reliance on images, the reliance on the fact that it's not, generally speaking, TV is not just about what is said, it's what you see. He said this encourages television to be about entertainment. Our culture then becomes about entertainment. He says information is communicated on TV, and including through news, only insofar as it entertains. I mean, when we think about, you can tie this back into capitalism a little bit if you want. And he does that a little bit in his book. I'm not focusing on that right now because critical theory is about how the culture becomes oppressive to people. But he talks about the fact that, if you are running a TV station, a TV channel, you are in competition with all the other channels, and you have got to be more appealing. A person can change the channel at a moment's notice. So that's why things get more and more spectacular. And even on the news, news has to be entertaining, because if the other channel is more entertaining, people are going to go to that. So he says this has this very simple logical progression. TV is visual, visual leads to entertainment. He says this has consequences for the content we receive. The medium determines the content. And in this case, a capitalistic visual medium is going to determine the content you get. And so one of his chapters focuses on the news. We tend to have the sense that when we're watching the news, it is not entertainment. What we are getting is we're learning about the world. And Neil Postman has just a fantastic chapter about this, saying that's not the case at all. I mean, think about the fact that the news almost always begins with music, which cues you into the idea that what you're seeing is not going to be a lecture on things. It is going to be something that is going to be entertaining in some way. So even from the get-go, he does that. And he talks about the fact that appearance of the newscasters is super, super important. Again, there's more in the book than I can get to in this. So let me get on to what he talks about in terms of the content. He says, first of all, and I apologize for this being this way, but this is the best way I could think to visually portray it. The entertainment is decontextualized. So he says what you get doesn't have anything to do with, first of all, what came before it. I mean, think about, you're watching the news, you're watching 2 to 3 minute segments usually. So even within the news, it is decontextualized from whatever came before it. They're not going to spend an hour giving you the historical context behind whatever's happening. And it is even more detached from any sort of context, because the news doesn't have anything, generally speaking, to do with what came before it either, what program was on before it. So he says all of this is just, you get fragments of information. It's not that they're lying to you. It's that it's decontextualized in a way that makes it hard for you to really get an understanding of what's going on, which we'll come back to when we talk about one of the 6 effects of taking in information from the TV. Okay, so first of all, decontextualized fragments of information is what you get through entertainment. Second of all, the focus is not on the fact that explains the story. It's on the fact that advances the story. So there is this momentum from beginning to middle to end that you get in a news story. No, we take that kind of for granted, but it's also important, as Postman points out, you learn the progress of the story, but you don't learn the why all of this is happening. The context, again, is left out because the context doesn't keep the thing rolling with momentum. So facts that advance the story, not facts that explain the story. Third is, if you take all of it together, you get this collage of, because it's fragments, collage of kind of superficial information. what, and this is not through any, again, he's not saying, first of all, it's not our fault. And second of all, he's saying it's not really even the fault of the people who are doing TV news programming. This is the content that the medium demands. The medium makes this kind of content possible. And so that's the kind of content we get. He's just saying, let's be aware of what the problem is for us. If this is the content, if we live in a culture that is increasingly about decontextualized information, about facts that advance stories, but not about the really deep whys of stories. And if it's all just a collage of this little piece, then this little piece, then this little piece, that's going to have an effect on our understanding of the world and our ability to live within it. Okay, so let's get down to the effects that this has. And I apologize for not being able to write them out. So I will kind of go slowly. If you need to pause the video and rewind, that, like, obviously do that. But I didn't have room to write these, what the specific 6 effects are. The effect of this kind of culture, this entertainment culture, on people. The first effect is that it gets us to think of the world as disorderly rather than patterned. When we take in our information from this visual medium, what we get is a sense of this thing happening, and this thing happening, and this thing happening, and this thing happening, and these things happening, and these things, and it's all sort of disconnected. The world seems chaotic, and I will grant you, the world is chaotic to some degree, right? At least on the surface level of our experience. But remember Marshall McLuhan talking about how a print culture organizes that for us. What Neil Postman is saying here is, our takeaway from this is similar to what McLuhan said, that the world is this disorderly, ununderstandable place. The second effect that it has on us is that it doesn't really require emotional response from us. Things aren't to be taken too seriously. And you think about the way news is presented to us is we get this 2 or 3 minute story. It might be about bombings and people dying, but then it's gone, and you go to a commercial, or you go to a story about sports, or some feel-good story, or a politician in some scandal. Well, what happened back before? Like, those people are still dead, right? Their families are still suffering, right? But what I'm encouraged to think about is that's just a thing that happened that I no longer need to care about because I've been told to care about this other thing now. Well, that's not good for me. How is that going to help me become an empathetic person? And the idea here is that that's not the point of this, right? The point of this is just, you set up this technology, it provides us with this type of content. The thinking isn't, well, let's make people better people. The thinking is, well, let's put out the content that this medium makes possible. Okay, so first was the world is disorderly. Second, the world is a place where things don't really require me to respond emotionally. Third is that despite those things, I have what he calls the illusion of knowledge. I think I know something because I just spent this time watching this stuff. But what I have is I've learned some disconnected facts, but that's not really knowledge. That's not really understanding. I can't coherently explain why these things happened, which, to go back to McLuhan and Postman, is kind of a fan of this sort of the idea of a print culture where, the world is organized and explained to us. He says this is not possible. I think I know something, but what do I really know? I can consume all kinds of knowledge or all kinds of information about current events, But unless I'm reading in depth about things, which is not getting it from TV, right? I tend to not really have a deep understanding of how these how the world is actually working, that it would have produced these outcomes. Fourth, he says, we tend to give up, because everything is this sort of collage, some of those things are going to be contradictory. He says we tend to give up caring about those contradictions. We tend to just make peace with the fact that, yeah, the world is this disorderly place, and sometimes people lie and sometimes they don't, and which takes us back to a few weeks ago when we talked about conflict theory. Remember, critical theories are splintering off from Marxism, which means splintering off from conflict theory. And we heard about fire hosing. We heard about these like Soviet propaganda techniques of just being able to lie and, try to make people not understand, or try to make people give up thinking that they can ever really know. Well, what Postman's saying is it doesn't even have to be done by a malicious agent. TV just lends itself to that. And then if you have a malicious agent come along, well, you've got a population that is primed for just being like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I don't really, but yeah, they lie. That's just life. It's not just life. That is just life if this is the way your culture has been created. Okay. Fifth, our fifth effect is that we go into situations expecting to be entertained, because we live in a culture that is based on entertainment. My videos, I commend all of you for being able to make it through this. These things are not entertaining. This is dry as can be, and I'm just sitting here in front of a terribly lit whiteboard. Look, it's got this little glowing thing. Sorry about that. That's the reflection from my computer screen. But it's terrible, right? There's nothing entertaining about this. It is work to watch 15 minutes of this. Where are we on time, by the way? Ooh, God, sorry. Well, 17 minutes, but I told you Postman I love, so I had to go a little bit farther. But think about how little you are looking forward to watching one of these videos as compared to watching a 2 or 3 hour movie, because we expect that life involves being entertained. That's part of our culture now. And because we're almost out of time, sixth, we expect explanations to be quick and simple. He has a great section in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, about commercials, and about how commercials socialize us to think that a problem should be, if not solvable, at least understood well within 30 seconds. You see a commercial, they present you with a problem, they present you with a solution. The solution involves buying a product, but there's a very quick problem to solution, very quick straight line. Even in, TV shows, even in dramas, you get presented with a problem and the thing is resolved within 30 minutes or 60 minutes. That's not the way the world works, right? We have problems. The problems, at least as of me recording this right now, the problems in the Middle East are problems that have existed for 100 years. It doesn't make any sense for any politician to ever tell you, well, here's what we got to do in the Middle East. They don't know. Nobody knows. Some problems are not solvable just by somebody saying, well, this is how you do it. But we are in a culture and we are people who expect that. It's not that the problems are unsolvable. It's that you just haven't had the right hero come along to explain it, which is a major problem for us to think that way, because there aren't heroes who can explain it. If it was easily done, it would have been done. Okay. I love Neil Postman. All right. Again, this isn't malicious, according to him. Now, malicious actors do exist. He doesn't deny that. He says this is just the logic of TV. You have a medium of communication. It creates whatever content is most applicable to that. Smoke signals create simple messages. TV creates visual messages. And the whole thing turns us into these 6 characteristics that we've talked about. He says the result is pleasurable, but intellectually incapacitating. We are literally amused to death in the sense that, I mean, now we have these colossal problems that we are not capable intellectually of dealing with because we are so used to being amused that we're not used to critically thinking our way through these things. Spectacular book. Spectacular book. That's it. All right. Thanks, guys.